Good evening and welcome to Sacred Dance with Trance. My name's Warren James, and this evening I am standing in for Kathy Beltran and interviewing a wonderful lady by the name of Suzanne Tempel. And just to fill you in a little bit before we start the discussion, Suzanne Tempel is an awakened mind consciousness trainer and works as a coach and teacher in that field. Suzanne is one of the very few people in the world who is trained in coaching and training people towards other states of consciousness, and she uses EEG measurements, which she'll be telling us about throughout her discussions with us today. She's one of the only awakened mind consciousness trainers who uses that form of technology, and she uses this also to measure mediums. And she has so far measured over 100 mediums. Furthermore, she's also cooperating in the research and study of physical mediums using this same method. And it is a wonderful pleasure to have her here with us today on this, my debut interview. And so, to everybody out there, please can I welcome Suzanne Tempel. Hello, Suzanne.
Hi, Warren. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction.
I got through it, so that's a good thing.
Yes, you did.
So, Suzanne, welcome.
Thank you. First of all, I have to correct you on one thing. You said that I was the only awakened mind consciousness trainer using EEG, but that's not true. Actually, every awakened mind consciousness trainer uses EEG. This is what we do here.
Okay.
But I'm the only one specialized in mediums. Yeah.
Fantastic. That clears that up, and that's important, and that will be important for people listening, because it's important for, I think, for people to differentiate who's doing what
Absolutely.
in their research, so as not to cause any confusion. And it sounds, from what I've read so far through your website and what I've read so far from your work that you've shared with me prior to this was linking up today, it's a really fascinating area. So
it is. It is. Yeah.
It is, and I think what I'd like you to do, if you wouldn't mind, so that everybody knows, so far the formal approach we have here is we ask you to go back to when it all started. In your case, would you be able to share with us how you got into this field of research?
Yes, absolutely. I started out as a communication professional, and I worked as an independent interim and project manager for years for international companies and the government, and mostly in ICT. There was always some technical components somehow, and sometimes I had to, reorganize technical help desk or outsource one, or buy software or any other thing. And even though I have no technical background, I always found myself somehow involved in software and technique. Now, some years ago, I did an accredited master's in coaching, merely to help people to cope with change within their organizations, where I was an interim manager, or later in their private lives. And the human psyche, therefore, has always been of interest to me, not only to help people, but the mere fact that people would have had problems with change within a company or within their lives would intrigue me, because I love change. So that's so far from who I am, so that intrigued me. Now, at one point, I stopped working as a project manager and started to become a full-time coach. And since I'm a medium as well, I started out at some point years ago to investigate in trance. I did several courses, and I began to set in a circle. And what I found is that my experience with trance did not match any of my fellow students, and yet teachers told us time and again that we were all in a state of trance, and that there were just levels of it. And now that didn't work for me. My logical brain somehow told me that what I was experiencing was so, profoundly different, that either I wasn't in trance or they were not. So I talked to my spirit team and I said, guys, listen, I want to know, or rather, I need to know this to move forward, because if my logical brain doesn't understand this, I just can't, fiddle around and, trial and error and see whether it works. And I believe it was in 2015. A friend of mine, dear friend of mine, who's a shaman actually, she came with a book of NOIs. She said, you need to read this. And I read the book and immediately sensed that I was onto something here. So my intuition told me to go to the USA. But I ignored that voice for a lot of practical reasons. And, we all know what happens when we ignore that inner voice. So to make a long story short, I did finish my education in the USA with wonderful Judith Beddington. She's been the last assistant of NOIs, and she's also the founder of the Institute for the Awakened Mind in America. And currently, she is involved in research in cooperation with the world famous Monroe Institute. So this is how I came into this field, actually.
Wonderful. And that study, that introduction took you into America as well to start with.
Yes. There were two other people actually who worked with Anna, and they have taken me places as well. One who worked with Anna while she was still alive and amongst us was Elizabeth St. John, and she's from the UK. And last year I had a wonderful talk with her. And she did a research back in the days when Anna was still alive, and with Professor Kate, and she did that on healers. Now Elizabeth is a healer herself, but she's retired now. And unfortunately, I did not have the permission to record that talk. Oh. So I can only hope that she will share her knowledge with the world in any other way sometime in the future. And I'm just grateful that she granted me the talk and insight to her work. Oh, now the other one, oh sorry.
I say that's wonderful, yeah.
Yeah, well, the other one who has worked with Anna will take me to Paris actually this year, and in Paris this year in May there is the second European Energy Psychology Conference. And this is a conference where researchers and neurophysicists and scientists and doctors gather around to share and to discuss, all sorts of new therapies, healing therapies, based on energy healing. And especially with a key part playing in that is the neuroplasticity of the brain. And one of the speakers there is an awakened mind trainer, and that's the one who worked with Anna, and his name is Gary Groesbeek. And I'm going there with Judith, actually, Judith Pennington, the founder of the Awakened Mind. So this field and the work I do has brought me so far to a lot of places and met a lot of wonderful people.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And I know when we spoke here, and I'm just looking at my notes here now as we talk, and I know we've looked into, we've already discussed and corresponded about what we're going to do on this talk tonight, because we're going to do this in two parts for those who aren't aware yet. This will be part one, and then we'll continue with a second interview, which will be part two, to be put out a little later. So that's your background in this research and what brought you into it. Where do we go to next?
Well, I started out as a normal awakened mind trainer, of course, working with EEG for mental training and healing. But of course, being a medium myself, I started to apply this to mediums and their unfoldment. And so now I specialize in mediums. Like you said, I've measured over 100 mediums so far, and I worked with a lot more. And I related the knowledge I had on states of consciousness and the development of those to the states and unfoldment of mediums, and I found how they relate. So that also brought me to working with week organizers like Nicole de Haas in the Zwanenhof on international courses. For instance, in April, there's the Trance and Physical Week, where I'll be a tutor as well, but on states of consciousness, of course. But it also brought me to a lot of other spiritual centers in Holland where I teach mediums. And later this year, in I think it's November, I hope to travel to the USA for that same purpose. So in a nutshell, I am not a scientist. I want to, make that very clear to people. Nor am I researching mediums as to why they are what they are, or the medium's brain and how that differs from other brains, or what the mechanics are with mediumship or physical mediumship. I know a lot of other people do that with EEG, but frankly, I don't care about that so much. I have found that so far it's not helping us to move forward in our development as mediums. Or at least up until this point, I haven't seen the benefits of it. However, I am using applied science from another field of work to mediums and learn along the way how we can, develop and possibly adjust the way we develop right now. And all I learn along the way, I share with students, so they will benefit from this. That's actually my ultimate goal. It's not a scientific one, but a very practical one. And I know that the spirit world helps me with this. They also showed me very recently that they do with my studies with Nicole. I will get back to the study with Nicole, as she granted me, very bravely I might add, permission to share my findings, as it helped her so much, and she believes it will help many others as well.
Wonderful. And we're going to look at that as we go through the duration of these two discussions. We'll be looking at Nicole and, of course, the findings overall, or some of the findings overall. I think first of all, though, or next point of call, I should ask, having understood how you came into the field of research, could you tell us a little bit more about the background of what awakened mind training is, and what EEG is? Because a lot of people are not going to fully understand perhaps what all of that is, especially if people have never looked into these fields before.
Absolutely. I'm going to start, if you don't mind, by explaining who invented, so to speak, what it is that I'm doing, because that will give you some sort of, I don't know the English word, some sort of a background information where to put the information about the what and the how.
Yes.
This actually was invented, so to speak, by Professor Maxwell Cade. Now, this was a British scientist, and he was a radiation physicist, a professor, an author, but he also was a mystic and a Zen master. and I believe that he was also a master hypnotist. Now, he worked for the British government as a physicist, and apparently he revolutionized radar in some sort of way. I don't know the details about it, but he also extended his knowledge of light and sound into the fields of mind research. He recognized that everything that's living, including the brain and the body and living things, are composed of frequencies of light. So he, as being a Zen master and recognizing this, he thought, what if we can measure consciousness? What if we can measure states of consciousness? Where would we measure that? And he came to the conclusion that the brain would be perfect for that. So he invented or co-invented together with Jeffrey Blundell, which was a technical engineer, what we use today. Of course, today we use a modern version of what they had. And on YouTube, you still find the old versions of the Mind Mirror, which is what we use. But it's improved so much. It's not only the hardware, but software has improved so much. Now, Professor Cade was also a member of the British Society for Psychical Research, and therefore he has this connection with psi and spiritualism and all sorts of things connected also with mediums. When he invented the mind mirror, he was able to, as being a Zen master, he was able to study the brain waves of a lot of people who meditate or were in higher states of awareness. And I think he measured over 4,000 people between, I think, 1970 and 1990, so in 20 years' time. And that study led to the publication of his classic book, and also to a new field, and a new field that was EEG led biofeedback meditation. So that was completely new at that time. So when he did his research, he was assisted by Anna Wise, which was an American lady, and she took the research and everything she learned with Kate, she took that to America, and she took that a little bit further. She studied and investigated a lot of people, artists, sportsmen, CEOs of big companies, and so she took that into what I would call a layman's field, rather than people, yogis and Zen masters and other people with high states of awareness. And she wrote 2 books about that. Yeah.
Wonderful.
So this is the people who started this, and what it is that we do. We actually, because Professor Cade mapped these states of consciousness with his device, which he developed together with Jeffrey Blundell, and he mapped these states of consciousness into patterns, brainwave patterns. Now, brainwave patterns, or brainwaves for that matter, are, no, I'm gonna start with what is a brainwave, because some people might not know. When we use our brains, they give little electrical impulses, and these impulses form waves, electrical waves, and we can measure that with little electrodes we put on the head, because the waves are not confined within the scalp, they'll project outside. So we can measure that when we put electrodes on the scalp. And while we measure their waves, we can categorize them in bandwidth. And we can project them into a screen showing a pattern. Now, Kate found that with different states of consciousness, they saw different patterns. So, for instance, a meditative state would give a specific pattern. A normal waking state would each time show that specific pattern. Now, everybody's brains work differently, but when you're in a certain state, you will show that pattern. Okay, so the pattern consists of relative figures. So it's always, normally when you produce in a normal waking state, you really produce a lot of beta, which is associated with thinking. So whether you'll produce a lot of amplitude with that or not, you will show a certain ratio within the pattern. I'm not sure whether I'm making sense, but
yes.
Okay. So he mapped those patterns that are consistent with these different states of consciousness. And one of the states of consciousness he discovered or he named was the awakened mind. But he also mapped trance as a state of consciousness, the trance state. I already mentioned meditation, but he also mapped different higher states of consciousness, superconscious, evolved mind, universal consciousness being the highest state of consciousness ever to be measured. So he mapped a lot of states of consciousness. Now, awakened mind consciousness trainers are trained to lead people into those states, because Professor Cade found because he experimented on his students as well, he found that if somebody was in a certain state, they would produce that pattern. But if he took somebody in an ordinary state, in a normal waking state, and he would train them to show them that pattern, so he would train the brainwaves to show that pattern, they would automatically come into that state of consciousness.
Right.
So it worked the other way around as well. So he did not only measure states of consciousness and map them, but he experimented, and he found that if you train your brain waves in a certain way to show that pattern, you will actually get into that state of consciousness.
So I don't know how to articulate this correctly, but yeah, so it works in reverse effectively.
Absolutely.
You could sit and develop in a particular method without the technique, and he could measure you and find that you had that pattern. But alternatively, you could follow the pattern, and
Absolutely.
you would. Wow. Okay. Wonderful.
Yes.
Wonderful.
So this is what awakened mind trainers do. We are trained to not only measure people, but also from the measurement, see where people are at their development and coach them to where they want to go. So, yeah.
Okay. So the obvious question is, we're called Sacred Dance with Trance.
Mm-hmm.
So the obvious question I'm going to ask then is, what have you found regarding trance?
Yes. Well, that's a very interesting question, because I have found that, well, a lot of things. Let me start first by that I believe, and I have discussed this with several people, that I believe that the way we teach trance and the way we develop for trance need to change. And the reason I say this is because I have found students, for instance, who have trained themselves to collapse their pattern. Now, what I mean by that is when I measure them with the EEG, they show a certain pattern. Now, whether it's trance or any other state or any in between doesn't really matter. But when I ask them to go to their altered state, all of a sudden you see their brainwave pattern collapse into sort of nothing, sort of a, no pattern at all. So the first time I saw that, I thought, this is strange, what's she doing? So I asked the lady who showed that what she was doing. And after that, I've seen it about 20 times with different mediums. And what that is that they entering this, well, they trained their brains anyway, to experience nothing, because that's what they taught, apparently, with some teachers. They apparently are taught that with trance, you're not supposed to, be aware or experience anything. You should be out of the way. And because they have no clue what they're doing, or starting too early in their development, doing that, they have found that, or their body remembered, that they are, when their pattern collapse, that they're in sort of a state of nobody's land. There's nothing really there. So the first time they experience that, they think, this is it. I must be in trance now. So the next time they go there quicker, and so it's going to be. They trained themselves to collapsing their pattern, thinking that that's, a trance state.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
And when I measure them, they can see, of course, because a lot of students I measure, or that's a precondition. I also give a lecture to, so they know what they're looking at when I measure them. But obviously, they see on my screen that that's not the case. They're not in trance. So I have to then, teach them again to get that pattern up. And usually, they're not entering a trance state. Usually, they're getting into one of the development stage before trance. And I said, okay, this is where you should be, and the next step should be this or this or that. But this is just one of the things I've found with developing mediums, just because of the way we teach them. Another thing sorry, my telephone. Another thing that I found is that some mediums, actually, believe it or not, have trained themselves to fall asleep for that same reason. So when you go down, you start to first minimize, so to speak, your beta brain waves, your thinking mind. This is what we're taught, reduce your thinking. So that's fine and good. But if you have no clue, or if you're not in that point of your development where you know how to stay aware or awake, you will enter the first state of sleep. And you would think that people would know that or feel that, but that's not the case, because the first stage of sleep, you're still aware of what's going around, or still aware of what's around you. You can still, hear sounds. As long as you don't move into that deeper state, you're fine. So what they have taught themselves is to linger between being awake and falling asleep. But that's not trance either. Another thing I have found, and I can't mention a name, but when I was, and she's not the first, when I was measuring one of the tutors that work at the AFC, at Findlay College, going to her altered state, and I showed her what was actually happening. she almost shouted, "Oh, for goodness sakes! I wish I should have known this, years ago," because she stopped sitting for trance. And the reason why she stopped sitting is because she felt she couldn't get into a trance state.
Mm.
And she was completely right. She wasn't going into a trance state. She was leaning towards the higher states of consciousness. But because we're training students all of the time that they should go deeper, 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 I don't know who invented that, but they should be locked up somewhere. But she was, she was going to higher states of consciousness, and I could see from my screen that she was, again you could see it in a pattern. Again, she was fighting that because that was not what she was taught to experience.
I think the common thing within certainly within the area and field of trance is that for many, many, many decades, and I suppose your research could even be starting to unravel this, is that for many decades it has been the blind leading the blind, and bad habits being passed on and passed on and passed on, in the same way as a faulty gene can be passed on and passed on, or
Yes.
something like that, because there isn't a consistent way of teaching trance. Whilst most people all accept and recognize that everybody's an individual in their own right, and nothing is fully the same, but there must be some underlying similarities here and there. And I think that's where we've never had technology so far to support and guide us, like in other fields of research and science and nature.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the problem. There hasn't been consistent teaching. It is old methods and hearsay and other people's interpretations, and very often it's one person's interpretation mixed with another and another that have been combined into a totally new monster almost, which encourage people to pay their money and come and learn this technique. And when that doesn't work, there's always another person offering another approach,
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem, I think. And I suppose your research is showing that to a great extent.
Absolutely. And of course, I have permission. Like I said, I have permission from Nicole to share whatever I found with her, and whatever happened to her, because she was so happy, and also it helped her so much that she says, "I don't care who knows. I believe that everybody should." Because Nicole was one of the people I measured, and this is also something very important. I need to explain. There's a difference between so-called normal EEG and the EEG we use. And I saw within the comments that there was something about that, because the normal EEG. Sorry, I'm diverting a bit, but this is important for people to realize. The normal EEG is a QEEG, which is working with a database of abnormalities. So they're looking for the diversions from the norm. So they're looking for basically abnormalities within adults. Now, this is very important because the first time I met Nicole, she was interested in working with EEG and using EEG for students. And she said that she had made an appointment with, she didn't go yet, but she had made an appointment with somebody to measure her. And I told her beforehand, I said, okay, well, listen, I know precisely what's going to happen. Since you're a medium, they will tell you that you have too much alpha and theta in certain areas, and they will tell you that you have some sort of a problem, which you will not able to recognize because you don't have a clinical problem. But this is because their measurements are, measured against a database with problems. And our database is not a database with problems. Our database is filled not with pathological states, but filled with data relating to all the states of consciousness. So it's not, EEG and EEG is not the same.
Mm.
And I had also 2 students who were measured with EEG, not in a clinic anywhere, but somewhere else where mediums work, and they were testing mediums. And one of them was Nicole, and they told her, as well as the other lady, they told her that she was in a constant state of trance. Now, I don't know who's able to say things like that, but apparently the system said so. So this is the reason why Nicole, eventually started the conversation with me. So she came back and she said, yeah, you were right. They were telling me I had this and this and this problem, which I don't recognize, and they're telling me that I'm in a constant state of trance. And I said, yeah. This is what they do because they have a different database. They can only, measure you against their norm, which is, a norm with pathological problems, and not with different states of consciousness. So the first time Nicole saw her, I measured Nicole. I saw that same thing with her. She was fighting her state of consciousness. She was showing these lovely higher state patterns, and then the pattern would change, and then the higher state would flare again, and it would change again. And I thought, what's she doing? And she came out of her old state, and I said, what were you trying to do? And she says, well, I couldn't go, I didn't go where I wanted to go. And I showed her, and I said, well, actually, when you were not manipulating, you were exactly where you needed to be. You were in a higher state of consciousness, and you were in a state of consciousness where the spirit world can work with you, because they don't have to move you out of the way, because you're in a higher state of consciousness. The deeper state of consciousness is a state of consciousness where the mind is subdued to such a level that you're out of the way. But with a higher state of consciousness, they don't need to get you out of the way. You're one with them. So once she realized this was, I had the discussion with her at the end of 2016 or beginning 2017. So once she realized that, her development went, very, very, very quickly, very moved. I didn't do anything. I just showed her what she didn't need to do. But, by having that confirmation and relaxing into it, she could develop very, very quickly, and lots of things happening in last year. And I have measured her twice since then.
And I think if I just explain to people who are currently observing this interview, Nicole did an interview with Kathy not too long ago. Nicole is not only is she a clairvoyant platform medium and tutor, but she is also a very good trance medium and developing splendid physical mediumship, which has been observed by, we know has been observed by 2 of the world's more recognized physical mediums out there. And so therefore we could say that her development during the last 12 to 18 months or so has been drastically assisted by the research and not only your research but your measurements of the EEG technology that you use.
Yeah, and this is also something you said in the introduction, that I'm researching physical mediums, and I am, and Nicole is one of them. I can't mention other names other than Stuart Alexander, because obviously a lot of people know that he's one of the physical mediums I'm researching. But the reason I'm saying this is because not only my spirit team, if you can speak of my spirit team, but also the spirit teams of both Nicole and Stuart, the controls actually instigated that I should measure them. So this is also why there's a lot of interest within the spirit world for what I do and what I bring into within mediumship into the movement, so to speak. Not as an awakened mind coach, but as an awakened mind coach specialized in mediums, because that's a difference.
Could you just explain a little bit more, because you've used two phrases there, and I know that some people watching this, or maybe even a lot of people watching this, are going to say, I understand what she's just said, but I don't at the same time. You mentioned people going into deeper states and people going into higher states.
Yeah.
When trance mediums are doing their work, let's say you are studying various trance mediums, do some go to a deeper state and some go to a higher state? Are most trance mediums going to a higher state than a lower state? What have you found?
No, there are mediums who go to a deeper state, and there are mediums who go to a higher state. This is why we need to change the way we teach, because we teach everybody to go to deeper state, or to go deep anyway. And people who go naturally to a higher state either give up, or they, fight themselves along the way. And I think and I believe that once they realize they are the one not going to a deeper state, they will, develop much faster, because they're not fighting themselves anymore.
Yes.
So ultimately, we do not need to change only the way we teach, but also the way we talk about trance, because we need to talk about all states, because not everything is a trance state. Oh, I see that the internet connection is unstable, so I don't know whether you heard that last phrase I said.
Yes, came through crystal clear. Absolutely fine.
Good.
So is there from your research so far and all of those people you've studied, I know you can't name the majority of them, but that's fine, because you still will have findings from that, or you'll be starting to make conclusions as you go along and observe. Is there any telltale sign to a trance medium who's developing and moving that way as to whether they are fighting it, whether they are meant to be going up but they're pulling themselves down, or even vice versa?
With it, I'm not sure I'm understanding the question. You're talking about trance mediums, right? Not physical mediums.
Trance mediums.
Yes. Oh, yes, of course you can see that. Yeah.
And how would an individual know, without an EEG measurement, whether they are fighting their own state? Has anything been sort of observed in that area, that you might know that you're fighting your state without even having an EEG measurement? Or does it really require that measurement to clarify that?
Not really, but what you experience could also be a sign of not being developed enough.
Right.
So with me explaining that in a few sentences here, I would confuse people more than I would explain,
Hmm.
because some mediums will not go to a deep state because they're at a point of their development that they're not able to go there. And some people are not going to the deeper state because they've moved past that point, but moving towards a higher state of consciousness.
And therefore, saying deep state, differentiating between deep state and higher state explains also why awareness is, or not being aware is not the be all and end all of a trance state. You can be a trance
Absolutely.
medium. You can be,
Absolutely.
you could be an evidential trance medium, providing evidence from the spirit world who are communicating through you, but you could potentially be aware of every single word that comes, regardless of, you don't necessarily need to be looking for an unconscious, I don't remember anything state, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. That's exactly it.
Well, then I would imagine, and I know we're a trance group, and I don't want to move too far and deviate too far away from trance, but then that would then, would it not suggest, do you think, that that explains the clairvoyance as well? Because if you can be aware in a trance state, then you are probably only, what, some kind of distance away before being somewhat totally conscious, and then you're moving into the realms of clairvoyance.
Not really,
Okay.
because within a deep state, your own thinking mind isn't used. But that's the same with the higher states. Your own thinking mind is not used.
So they're mirrored almost. There are similarities between the two states. The thinking mind is reduced.
Well, no. It's better, I think, if I explain this with the pictures around it. But with the higher state of consciousness, the beta or the rest of the brain, so to speak, is still used by the spirit world, as is with the deeper state of consciousness. The difference is that with the higher state of consciousness, your um, your own thinking mind isn't in the way.
Right.
That's the difference.
And I think it's worth just pointing out to everybody who's watching this that in part two, we will be discussing and using a is it PowerPoint that you use, or we'll be using images and lots of technical graphs for everybody to enjoy, with
Yeah,
lots of
I know.
colours to explain
Yeah,
things. But it does make a lot of sense, and I think I would urge people to watch on to video too when we release this, because just a few nights ago, Suzanne and I met up and spoke and showed me some of the graphs, and some of what she told me in discussions on email and on the phone didn't make sense. But once you put a picture to it and you have something to correlate it to visually, to some extent, the penny starts to drop.
absolutely.
There's a shift, and it all comes into line that little bit more, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And still, sometimes people come to my lectures for the third time, and then I think why are you coming for the third time? You already heard this twice. And when I ask, they still say, "Oh, I know I heard it before, but somehow I always hear something different that I didn't hear before, and now it connects all together, or it makes sense, or something." So it's not a subject that you can explain within 5 minutes. So it's not my goal here to explain my full job,
No.
because I can't. But what my goal is here is to make people aware of the fact that there is such a thing as EEG, human message states of consciousness, and that there is research done by myself, and for mediums and for their altered states, um, to improve the way we develop and teach. Again, I'm not a scientist, but I use applied science for mediums to move forward. That's my goal. I'm not interested in to see how somebody's brain works just because they're a medium. I'm a very practical lady. I I had the question when I developed my trance, and I always think that I'm not that unique. If I have a question, then there's got to be more people with the same question. Am I in the trance state or not? So when I saw my brainwave pattern for the first time, I realized I'm not in the trance state. This completely matched with my experience, and it went against everything the teacher said. But I was so happy to, see that, and it all clicked. It all made sense because I'm not going to a deeper state as well.
Wonderful. And I think what you're doing is going to, as you said before, certainly is going to, if it doesn't do it immediately, is going to have to challenge the way trance is taught overall. It's certainly going to challenge that particular thing because I think it's without question there's a lot of confused trance mediums out there.
Yeah, and rightfully so. And rightfully so. And it's not only the way we teach, but it's also the way we speak about trance. But again, because we mentioned trance and trance again. But actually, when I do my lectures and my workshop with mediums, I always talk about my old state, because whether you go to a deep state or a high state, it's an altered state of consciousness, and that's the way spirit works with you. So it's not necessarily a trance state. Could be an evolved mind state. Could be an awakened mind state. Could be any other state. But to call everything trance and therefore teach everybody the same thing, that's ridiculous.
I can see that we're probably going to be on the verge of changing the name of the group. Sacred Dance with Altered States.
With altered states, yeah.
Doesn't have the same ring though, does it? But
No.
I can understand exactly where you're coming from, and I know so I can say that I have heard some teachers down the line in recent years, at least, they use the word trance, but more often than not, they are talking about your altered states.
Yes.
Moving into an altered state,
And I know also teachers who actually tell their students that they are going to a higher state. I know Eileen Davis is one of them. So I know that there are teachers who do this differently, but still there's not a majority.
No, and I think with it's with research like this and with good data, that is what challenges the status quo, and that's what usually changes things to move in a new direction, and which will, I'm sure, open up a lot of doorways for a lot of people going forward. Of course,
yeah,
valuable research.
Yeah, I know. At least Nicole altered the way she teaches trance to students because of it. So yeah.
Wonderful. So, having covered your background, we've got an understanding of what the EEG is. We've got an understanding of awakened mind tutors and teaching. We now understand that not everybody is going down and deep. Some people are going up and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
So on that note, I think what we should do is look towards moving forward to perhaps looking at doing your presentation with showing the charts and things like that, if that would work for you.
Yeah, that will work for me.
Wonderful. Before we finish this first part, what I am going to do is put these two videos out very close together so that people can get straight onto it, because I'm realizing we learn as we go along, folks. I'm realizing that actually the best thing we can do is give people the opportunity to start looking at this straight away. So now they've got the foundation part of what this is all about. So in the next video, we will discuss in much more depth and with charts and images and graphics as well. Can I just ask though, there was something you said before, further back, but that'll have to come back to me later on because I can't remember it
I
now.
can't remember.
It
All
doesn't
right.
matter. So what we'll do, let me tell you that what we're going to do going forward, so that everybody at home, listening at home or wherever you are in the big wide world, in the next session we're going to talk with Suzanne about the development of the states of the awakened mind, but moreover we'll be talking about trance as a state of consciousness. Is
Yes,
that correct?
that's correct.
I think we said we're going to be explaining uh, the pattern of this, and you'll also look at Nicole's, some more about Nicole's, what you studied with Nicole and others, and understanding how to move forward. Because if
Yeah.
we don't learn how to move forward, then we are literally standing on the spot, which looks like we have for many been doing that for a long, long time.
Yeah, this is what I tell my students all the time. If you have no clue where you're at, then you have no clue where you're supposed to be, and how to get there.
Yes, that's wonderful. Well, in that case, then we shall conclude this first part. And those of you at home, in a moment, this will be uploaded for you all. And part two should be there as well, following on as soon as possible. So, Suzanne, we'll prepare ourselves for the real science, shall we?
Yep.
And we'll join you all in a moment. Thank you very much.